So it's one of these, glossy. Obviously, some resources must have went into the production of it, and is, purportedly about their first 120 days in office. So it certainly was sent out on the anniversary of that.
It's pretty sharp, does it? Nice publication.
Well, I mean, on the surface, it certainly does. But one of the things that we really want to see from the Premier is him honoring his commitment to have I think he called it a discussion, but I think what we really need is some sort of review of the K-12 education system. He had committed during the debate that they had between him and Mr. Kent and Mr. Ottenheimer to have a review of the K-12 education system, looking at the strengths and the weaknesses. And we've really not had anything resembling education reform here under this government, certainly not since 2011, unless you really want to count the amalgamation of the four English school boards, and I'd encourage you not to count that. But that's really the only thing we've really had in the way of educational reform. Now, just nearby to us here, over in Nova Scotia, they've had quite a lot of activity since their government was, I guess the new government was elected there. Was it 2013, was it?
Somewhere around there. It didn't seem like long ago, but maybe it was, yeah.
They've had a fairly lengthy process when it comes to reviewing their education system, and around the same time that Paul Davis sent out his 120-day report, they issued a document that was a reform document for their education system. And one of the things that they've had happening in Nova Scotia is something else we've seen here in this province, which is students falling behind in terms of math skills and literacy skills, both nationally and internationally. If you look at comparative test scores on student achievement in math and literacy, and I think when it comes to educational reform, there's no real need to reinvent the wheel, because things like that are going on in other provinces all of the time. And like I said, we haven't had a lot of activity. And this particular document calls for new investments and new approaches to mathematics. And of course, that's something we've heard a lot about, interventions for math. They had something in there calling for a class size cap for high school mathematics, for more class time for teaching of mathematics and literacy in the early years. So if you think about sort of the kindergarten and up, or up to grade 3, 4 levels. So there's a lot of stuff in that. There's another thing in there.
Maybe we should just steal the good work they've done.
You know what? I mean, if it's good, I mean, who cares which political party or province it is, right? If they're good ideas, they had some really interesting stuff in there around creating plain language resources for parents to help their kids with mathematics homework. And I think that's something we really want to look at as new homework standards, because we hear a lot of complaints, not just from high school students, but from parents of kids that aren't quite up there. And I think the other thing we want to really think about is an action plan that has measurable goals, and this is the other thing that has. And British Columbia has done a similar thing. They have an education action plan, and it draws everything right back to identifiable goals and objectives, rather than sort of flailing around in the dark. And that's really not what we've been doing here, because what we've really had is government hasn't done a whole lot. They've certainly put resources into the system here and there, and teachers are getting by hook or by crook. I thought one of the other things that I thought was really interesting in this Nova Scotia report was how they are thinking about approaching professional development in the future. And this could potentially be contentious with educators, and I'm not really sure, because I haven't had a great opportunity to talk with them about. But that's scheduling professional development at times of the school year that aren't as disruptive as some parents often feel that it is. So scheduling it outside the school year even. So lots of interesting ways of approaching providing additional resources to students, to teachers, to reforming the education system, but not a lot of need to spend a lot of money, in my opinion, to expend a lot of resources, because a lot of this work has been done in the other provinces. And I noted in the Premier's report, because I went looking for it, that there really was silent on activity in that area. And I think if he wants to take on one of the more weighty issues in the province, I think that's really one of the sore points that really needs to be looked at, because it's far overdue. We've had a couple of reviews around the funding formula for education, for teacher allocation, for special education. A lot of the things around special education were never followed through on. Prior to that, we had a review of the post-secondary education system, but that's a decade old now. We really need to go back and have a look at what some measurable objectives are, and what are the sorts of supports that we can provide to students, to educators, and to parents to improve the system. Because like Nova Scotia, like other provinces in the country, we keep struggling towards the bottom of the pack when it comes to the basic skills that kids really need to succeed when they get out of school.
Yeah, those fundamentals are so key and important, and they are measurable, and you can compare one jurisdiction to another and how we're doing. I think that's a no-brainer, just sort of use that term, but I mean it's something that has to be done. It's clear there's a problem. It appears to be getting worse, and it's high time that we look everywhere to see what can and what's working, what can be done, what's working, and start to adopt some of those things. I think you're right there. It's a major initiative that needs to be followed up on, not just talked about.
Absolutely, and you got to have the courage to say, we're going to do X. This is what our goal is going to be, and I can assure you, once we get into the election period, the Liberal Party will have a platform that very specifically says what it is, our goals, what our objectives are, what it is we plan to achieve. But as this is a free advice for the Premier or for his Minister of Education, if they're listening, that when they do their review that the Premier promised over 120 days ago now, these are places to look, and don't be afraid to put to define what the objective is, because I think that's what we've really got to have the courage to do, because I think you got to have the courage to fail as well as to succeed, right?
Right. All right, sir. Listen, thanks very much. Let's talk about this again. And of course, there's all-day kindergarten and all those things to still talk about, and where that is, I suppose, in our
well, just before you go,
priorities.
I just want to say I want to throw a bouquet out to the crowd that met last week, Sunday, and they formed a new coalition around early learning and childcare. And I think that's something that's sorely needed as well. But it's a conversation for another time. But there is work being done independently by groups out in the community when it comes to education. You don't have to look very far to find it. So I want to congratulate those people, because that's important work that needs to be done as well.
Right on. Okay, well, listen, thanks again. Right
yep, bye-bye.